Hello again and welcome to SFF180 Retro, where I discuss older SFF titles, maybe not major classics, but stories definitely worth your time to track down. Today I'm looking at a couple of late career novels from the late Kit Reed, which tap into some very believable anxieties that I think remain relevant to this day. Hello again everybody, Thomas here, your host as always. Thank you so much for joining me. One of speculative fiction's great unsung authors was Kit Reed, who published 30 novels between 1961 and 2017 before her death that year at the age of 85. She never wrote any high-profile classics nor any major bestsellers as far as I can tell, but she was one of those authors deeply admired by her peers as well as fans who like to take a deep dive into literary spec-fic. Reed's very first published short story, The Wait, dates back to 1958, and it remains one of the most chilling works of early feminist folk horror you're likely to read anywhere. Many of Reed's later novels could be described as intimate dystopias. Not the kind of thing, popular in YA, where valiant teenage superheroes are fighting against monolithic fascist oppressors, No, it's more like quiet and chillingly believable stories about subtle shifts in our culture that end up normalizing harm, and the people who are harmed by those shifts. Her novel At Expectations, published in 2000, was an early satire about the dangers of living the extremely online life, as well as internet parasocial relationships, where unhappy housewives discover an online community in which they can have virtual friends and families and even lovers, and how the line between fantasy and reality inevitably and dangerously begins to blur. And her 2004 novel, Thinner Than Thou, is a blistering satire about how society's unhealthy obsession with body image, especially fat phobia, gives rise to an actual fanatical religious order, where concentration camps enforce starvation diets. Now, this book was given the Alex Award by the Young Adult Library Services Association, which is a division of the American Library Association. Kit Reed was a very nice lady. She sent me a really kind tweet about a year before she died, thanking me for my review of one of the two books I'll be talking about in the video today. Naturally, I will provide links to my full-length reviews down below. I have to say that at her best, Kit Reed was an author who made extremely imaginative use of the tools of speculative fiction to bring us original stories that illuminated some of the darker corners of human impulse, as well as our personal fears of isolation, abandonment, and having nowhere to belong. The Baby Merchant is ruthless and intense. It's a story about the extremes to which people can be driven by sheer need. It takes place in either a near future or alternate present timeline in which global birth rates have plummeted and America has effectively closed its borders. Now, to hopeful parents, life just always seems unfair. Unwanted babies are born to poor women, unequipped to care for them, while affluent couples who have concentrated on their careers while hitting the snooze button on their biological clocks have found to their dismay that time has run out. But waiting lists at adoption agencies are impossible, and the routine microchipping of newborns effectively rules out any illicit purchases. For desperate couples who have the money, there is Tom Starbird. His specialty is finding and stealing unwanted product and rehoming it with a family who meets his strict requirements. Now, Starbird is as good at his profession as he is at the monumental self-justification it requires. If a client couple show any signs that the child will not come first at all times, they're out. If their motives are selfish, just wanting a child as an accessory for status or clout, they're out. If their home doesn't pass a site inspection, if there is anything in their backgrounds that doesn't check out, any number of factors could disqualify them. Now, Starbird will only perform if he is convinced that the child is on its way to a better life than would have been possible otherwise. Private schools, trust funds, pure unconditional love. It all has to be the very best. We know early on that Starbird is overcompensating. An unwanted child himself, he knows all too well that when parenthood is all about whatever ego trip the parent is on, the misery for the child is incalculable. Growing up hoping to please someone who has already decided that you're the cause of their failures is hardly something a child can hope to escape from unscathed. And Starbird hasn't. Starbird has more or less made up his mind to get out of the business when he is blackmailed by a blustery, arrogant television journalist to provide him with a baby. Now, ordinarily, the despicable Jake Zorn and his sweet but long-suffering wife Mari would be refused out of hand, if only for Mari's one past suicide attempt, the very background blemish that has led to their rejection by legitimate adoption agencies. But Zorn knows exactly which button of Starbird's to push, and pushing it, a chain of events is set in motion that can only end in disaster. Reed's attention to and empathy towards character gives the novel its power. Starbird's massive contradictions comes to a boil, putting him in a position of having to sort all of them out, mostly his conflicted feelings towards his mother, to whom he still feels a bond despite her attempts to abandon him as a little boy. And he has to do all this before he can find any path to redemption. At the center of the oncoming storm is pregnant teenager Sasha. Now, she is no one-dimensional wallflower, just a regular girl whose aspirations to an art career have been sidelined by her pregnancy, and now has to find the inner strength to adapt. Now, she's the opposite of Starbird's mother, who had him because she thought he'd inspire her poetry, and the instant he didn't, rejected him. The first thing Sasha learns is that her pregnancy, let alone her whole body, is not respected as her own by nearly anyone. The baby's father and a domineering grandmother both want to control her and the child, and she ends up fleeing the unwed mother's home, where she has found refuge, because they keep trying to force her to place the baby with couples she doesn't trust. Once she's out and on her own, she has to determine her fate, to keep the baby or adopt him out. Circumstances will drive her choice. The Baby Merchant is a wrenching and powerful work of character-driven, socially conscious speculative fiction. It explores the depths of human self-absorption and deception, and treats the commodification of human life with an unflinching eye to its disastrous consequences. It's a work of rare courage. Going from a story about obsessive parents doing everything they can to acquire a child, we shift to an equally bleak future in which exhausted parents are all too eager to offload their problem children and willing to pay for the trouble. Now, ENCLAVE is not as well constructed a story as The Baby Merchant. Its emotional truths are perhaps far more convincing than a lot of its plot contrivances, but its themes are powerfully on target. Why bother to nurture a teen through the painful years of adolescence and young adulthood? Hell, let alone listen to their feelings or respect them as human beings, when you can as easily toss them out like a pair of unfashionable shoes? Especially when doing so lets you avoid facing the fact that it was your own parental incompetence that let them go wildly astray in the first place. 100 of the world's richest and most powerful families have eagerly paid stupefying sums of money to an ex-Marine, Sergeant Whitemore, to take their problem children off their hands and into the protective cloister of his newfound Klothos Academy, situated within one of those ancient monasteries perched on a cliff so high it takes a helicopter to get there. Which does make you wonder how the old monks built the place. To get the parents to go along with this scheme, Sarge, as he is known, has convinced them that the turbulent state of world affairs is a precursor to Armageddon. By allowing him to shelter their kids on his island, he will save them from global doom. Now, we have no idea if this is true. We're pretty sure it isn't. If it were, Sarge wouldn't have to show the kids carefully edited DVDs and pass them off as breaking news, so they'll appreciate what horrors they're missing. We also get the distinct idea that Sarge's client families know the end-of-days scenario is bogus, and they don't care. They just want their misbegotten progeny out of the picture. If they have to entertain a self-gratifying fiction that they're saving the kids' lives to let them feel better about themselves, then fine. The kids, well, they're a sad lot. You have Killer Stade, who killed a man, as his nickname might indicate, except no one quite seems to care that the act was self-defense against a sexual predator. There's a trans kid named Xander, and Teddy Regan, a prince of some tiny country whose epilepsy is an embarrassment to the royal family. Sarge has a messiah complex. His experiences in the Gulf War have given him something deeply strange to prove. He really wants to save lives, not destroy them. He's sincere in his belief that by taking a group of messed up teenagers and subjecting them to quasi-military regimentation in his academy, he can in fact turn their lives around and make them mature, productive adults. He believes the academy is his ark. Not surprisingly, he has set himself up to fail from the get-go. Many of his adult staff are bottom of the barrel. His doctor is a stinking alcoholic. His IT expert is a guy facing life for a glorious string of felonies. The only member of Sarge's staff with her head on straight, relatively speaking, is the physician's assistant, Cassie Rivard, who either loves Sarge or loves her idealized image of him. Finally, there is the intensely pitiful Benedictus, the last of the monastery's original residents. Now, he isn't a monk, just an orphan the monks adopted, but everyone calls him Brother Benny anyway. And this saddest of sad sacks with a past upon which the story will turn is torn between the happiness he feels at having company on the lonely island once again, and the way the Academy has completely overturned the routines of the only life he's ever known. ENCLAVE joins the ranks of speculative fiction exploring the concept of a closed society and its inherent stability or lack thereof, particularly when presented with an unforeseen variable that tests its members' ability and willingness to stick together to overcome their problems, or collapse into chaos. Now, usually in these stories, the latter happens because you tend to get a more exciting story that way. But while ENCLAVE sticks to that formula so far as it goes, Reed builds an overpowering tension as the novel accelerates into its final chapters. Couple this effective thriller storytelling with everything the book has to say about the often fraught relationships between teens and adults, and about the duties in those relationships that are all too easily ignored or discarded, and you have a flawed but mostly powerful tale of an island of lost souls that will stay under your skin for some time. So there you have it. A couple of fascinating novels by an underappreciated author whose legacy is still worthy of discovery. Now remember the most important thing, these are reviews. You're not always going to agree with me, but if you enjoyed watching, please hit that like button, share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends, and above all, please subscribe. If you have not done so, that is how the channel grows. You can also support the channel at my TeePublic store and at my Patreon, where recruits into Wink's Army get little perks, like occasionally, if I finish them on time, getting early access to some of my videos. I use the Patreon money to pay Matt Olson, my brilliantly talented channel artist who gives me all of my incredible thumbnails and things. So I want to thank all of you for that extra support. I want to thank all the rest of you for being the very best viewers in all of BookTube, and until I see all of you next time, please stay safe and healthy, and happy reading.